Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Slumber Party. Thanks for stopping by. If you've never been in the channel, we just hang out and we go exploring on the interwebs. So today I've got my lemon water and I have a little bit of time before I head out to a gig. I thought we could do some exploring in some uninhabited islands. Let's see what we find. Ten uninhabited islands around the world. Let's check them out. People have long been fascinated by deserted islands. Famous literary classics have inspired the imaginations of generations of readers, long after the world map was filled in. While there may not be unmapped islands to discover, well, you know what? Instead of uninhabited, let's actually check out Unexplored. That's a different topic. Let's see what comes up. 6 new? I didn't know we could have 6 new unexplored islands. Some corners of the earth still remain uncharted and inhabited by very few people. Here are some of the unexplored places around the globe. There's a place in Brazil is home to at least 14 of the Amazon's uncontacted tribes. An estimated 2,000 indigenous people live here autonomously. Wow. Northern Patagonia, Chile. Home to temperate rainforests, glaciers, fjords, and hot springs. The ice field remains one of the largest masses of ice outside the polar regions. Wow. Kamchatka, Russia, has over 300 volcanoes, including one that has been erupting continuously since 1996. It's the most densely populated brown bear habitat in the world. That's interesting. A little typo there. Northern Forest Complex, Myanmar. Many of the subtropical forests located on the easternmost stretch of the Himalayas are virtually untouched by human activity. And it has the largest tiger preserve in the world. Interesting. New Hebrides Trench, Pacific Ocean. Scientists didn't delve into this submarine trench until 2013, and it is home to unusual species of prawns and eels which live deep in the ocean. Place in Madagascar. This wilderness preserve is a labyrinth of gorges and forests. Look at that. Various species of plants and animals are endemic to the region. Greenland. 6 new untouched islands off the coast were discovered in 1999. What? And much of the inland part of the country is still uninhabited. Some 80% of the island is covered by ice caps. That was cool. Let's see what the BBC has to say. The last unmapped places on Earth. Now that is where I want to live. Have we mapped the whole planet? There are mysterious, poorly charted places everywhere, but not for the reasons you might think. In 1504, an anonymous map maker, most likely an Italian, carved a meticulous depiction of the known world into 2 halves of conjoined ostrich eggs. The grapefruit-sized globe included recent breaking discoveries of mysterious distant lands, including Japan, Brazil, and the Arabic Peninsula. Sure. I'm sure this Italian map maker had never discovered the Arabic Peninsula. Not that he discovered it, was just aware of it. I mean, they're literally on the same continent. But blanks remain. In a patch of ocean near Southeast Asia, that long-forgotten map maker carefully etched the Latin phrase, Hic sunt dracones, here are the dragons. Today it is safe to say there are no unknown territories with dragons. However, it's not quite true to say that every corner of the planet is charted. We may seem to have a map for everywhere, but that doesn't mean they are complete, accurate, or even trustworthy. I agree. For starters, all maps are biased towards their creator's subjective view of the world. As Lewis Carroll famously pointed out, a perfectly objective and faithful one-to-one representation of the world will literally have to be the same size as the place it depicted. Therefore, map makers must make sensible design decisions in order to compress the physical world into a much smaller, flatter depiction. Those decisions inevitably introduce personal biases, however, such as our tendency to place ourselves at the center of the world. We always want to put ourselves on the map. This is Jerry Broughton, a professor of Renaissance Studies at Queen Mary University in London and author of A History of the World in 12 Maps. I need to buy this book. Maps address an existential question as much as one that's about orientation and coordinates. We want to find ourselves on the map, but at the same time we are also outside of the map, rising above the world and looking down as if we were God. It's a transcendental experience. So that just gave me the thought that just like they use religion to control people, they've been using geography as well, right? So, which is why he says the first thing most new Google Earth users do is to hook up their own addresses. Lookup. Modern technology enables this exercise in ego, but the tendency itself is nothing new. It dates back to the oldest known world map, a 2,500-year-old cuneiform tablet discovered near Baghdad that puts Babylon at its center. Map makers throughout history adopted a similar bias toward their own homeland, and little seems to have changed since then. Today, American maps still tend to center on America, Japanese maps on Japan, and Chinese ones on China. Some Australian maps are even rotated so that the southern hemisphere is on top. It's such an egocentric approach that the United Nations sought to avoid it when they created their emblem, a map of the world neutrally centered on the North Pole. Is that why they created that map? Similarly, maps can overestimate their creators' geographic worth or reveal bias against certain places. Africa's true size, for example, has been chronically downplayed throughout the history of mapmaking, and even now, non-Africans tend to underestimate the size of that truly massive continent, which is large enough to cover China, the US, and much of Europe. Wow. Religious, political, and economic agendas also come into play, adulterating the map's objectivity. The maps of World War II, for example, were incredibly propagandist, depicting dreadful red bears and red perils. Breton says, the maps were distorted to tell a political message. A map, he continues, will always have an agenda, an argument, a proposal about what the world looks like from a particular perspective. Skewed view. Even today's digital maps adhere to this rule, he says. Google and other digital map makers turn the world into one enormous web browser, he explains, driven by commercial interests. But Manik Gupta, the group product manager at Google Maps, counters that Google Maps' primary goal mirrors that of its company, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Commerce is just one part of that. At the end of the day, technology is a tool, Gupta says. Our job is to make sure it's super accurate and works. Users then decide how they want to use it. Nevertheless, even digital maps skew towards the things that their users deem most important. Those areas that the majority sees as unworthy of attention, poor neighborhoods like the Orangi Shanti town in Karachi, Pakistan, or the Netza Chacoitza slum in Mexico City, as well as those places that map makers do not often go, war-torn regions, North Korea, remain grossly undermapped. This neglect means maps of remote regions can contain areas that go unnoticed for years. Scientists paying a visit to Sandy Island, a speck of land in the Coral Sea near New Caledonia, recently discovered that the island simply did not exist. The Phantom Island had found its way onto Australian maps and Google Earth at least a decade ago, probably due to human error. Oh my god. They were mapping an island that didn't even exist. Apparently, Google has two approaches to addressing these problems: sending map makers out into the wilderness with street view cameras attached to backpacks, bikes, boats, or snowmobiles, and launching MapMaker, a tool created in 2008 that allows anyone anywhere to enhance existing Google Maps. If it's important, then most likely the users will put it on the map, Gupta says. Wow, favelas. Look at that. It's wild. The people who live here and then the people who live here. But while many communities have literally put themselves on the map, others have not. Most likely, map in Rio de Janeiro's favelas or the floating slum of Macoco in Lagos isn't a top priority for those living there. Traditional paper maps tend to neglect these areas as well. They are places that the state denies or doesn't want to portray as part of its landscape, says Alexander Kent, a senior lecturer in geography and GIS at Canterbury Church University in the UK. Far from being something objective that just reflects what's on the ground, the person behind the map has the power to determine what goes on it or not. It's very true. So, I guess I'll finish this article. There's not too much left. In recognition of this problem, a new effort called the Missing Maps Project, organized by the Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, and the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, recruits volunteers to fill the cartographical blanks in the developing world. It's too early to tell whether the project will make a substantial dent, but launch parties are scheduled in London and Jakarta to try and drum up interest among potential volunteers. The ocean, likewise, is one of the most poorly mapped areas of the planet, despite the fact that it occupies the most space. The great terra incognita is the ocean bed. Broughton says, in light of increasing interest in underwater mining and drilling, certain countries, especially Russia, are looking to lay claim on the large tracts of ocean floor. Additionally, with sea ice quickly receding, more and more territory will come up for grabs as the landscape changes. It becomes possible to exploit more mineral resources, so mapping becomes extremely powerful and important, Broughton says. To draw attention to this map of knowledge, Broughton and artist Adam Lowe are creating a 3D map of the ocean floor without water. I think geographers are beginning to understand that mapping the oceans is one of the great untold stories. For others, though, untold stories abound even in some of the most prolifically mapped places in the world. Dave Imus, an award-winning mapmaker based in Oregon, acknowledges that much of the world has been mapped in a basic sense, but believes that the vast majority of the maps are not good enough. So many maps are difficult to understand, forcing the eye and mind to work overtime, trying to perceive what it's looking at, he says. And a digital map with spoken directions is good for helping you find a restaurant, but you're no more connected with your surroundings than looking for the next turn. Frustrated with the maps on offer for the U.S., he set out to make his own, turning to the really expressive mapping style of Swiss cartographers as inspiration. It's my hypothesis that the reason Europeans are so much more geographically aware than we Americans is that we have these maps that make their surroundings understandable and we don't, or they do and we don't, he says. The essential geography of the United States. The fruit of his labor is the essential geography. Let's check it out. Actually, let's check out Florida. What the yellow parts represent? That's interesting. Well, all right, a couple more paragraphs left and we are finito with this article, you guys. So that was the fruit of his labor, that map, a highly informative map that does away with the muddle of rainbow-colored states of traditional U.S. maps, instead delineating boundaries in green and allowing each state's actual features, mountains, forests, lakes, urban centers, highways, to characterize those places. City populations are indicated in yellow patches, and rather than cram in as many towns as possible, Imus used the census data to standardize rural places in terms of what counts as a hub in that particular area, whether that means 500 or 5,000 people. Major landmarks and transportation centers like airports are marked. Native American reserves are included, something lacking on many maps, and elevation of not only of mountains but also cities is noted. The National Geographic map of the U.S. has some elevations of mountain peaks, but doesn't even tell you the elevation of Denver, Colorado. As a consequence, it doesn't communicate anything meaningful about what that place is like if you've ever been there. Such maps are incredibly time-consuming and expensive to produce. However, Imus spent 6,000 hours on his. Wow. As a result, as far as Imus knows, only Europe, Japan, New Zealand, and now the US have maps available that meet these high standards. We think we're living in this modern age and everything's been done, but for people who look at mapping at a slightly different angle, they'll see things that still need to be done virtually everywhere, he says. Still, Imus dreams of a day when such maps will be widely available everywhere and at increasingly fine scales, such as at the state and city level. Ultimately, he hopes this would foster a more geographically literate society. I've felt misunderstood at times, Imus said, but I've gotten so much great feedback on this project that I feel like people now get it, and I'll continue on. Imagine that, to feel misunderstood as a cartographer. Look at this. Almost done with this article, you guys. But even the most detailed maps cannot get around one fundamental problem in the way of creating a near-perfect cartographic representation for any place in the world. The incredible pace of change, both human and nature-made, that characterizes life on the planet. Some cities in Asia and Africa, Gupta says, are undergoing so much construction that Google Maps have been unable to keep up. At the same time, natural landscapes are constantly in a state of flux, now more so than ever. Islands are being devoured by the sea, ice flows are disappearing, shorelines are eroding, and forests are being cleared. The very moment you built the perfect map of the world is the moment it goes out of date, Gupta says. The real world will always be a little ahead of how we represent it because change is constant. In that sense, the entire world is undermapped, and it will always remain that way. A bird's eye view of a city tells you it's there, but not how to navigate through all the corners of it. A fold-out map is a relic of the time it went to print, unable to take into account earthquake destruction, new roads, or renegotiated borders. And Google Maps can provide turn-by-turn instructions for biking from London to Brighton, but fails utterly when asked to do the same for traversing a Brazilian favela or the Gobi Desert's dunes. Even our best maps, then, are merely more up-to-date and truer to place than others. Our age-old quest to capture uncharted land and space will never end. Wow, super interesting. Well, that'll do it for this video, you guys. Short and sweet. I'm going to come back later, though, after work and make another one. We'll go exploring again. What do you guys think? Have you ever looked into cartography or maps? I've watched Martin and other researchers just go through eons of maps that are out there that have been created in the past that you can still find today, and we'll go through some of them later tonight when I get home. So smash the like button, you guys. We appreciate the content. Comment below, what you think, places you'd like to go exploring, and subscribe. I'll see you soon.